application, a lesson that might be helpful. And so we want to do that tonight. We'll go ahead and just start because we'll have an abbreviated class tonight. And my plan is not for us to go over our Bible readings. We'll try to catch up with everything on Sunday. We've come to the 13th chapter of Nehemiah. And we got down to what verse, guys? Verse 21. We are in the section here of where the people of God were in Babylonian captivity for how many years? 70. And then they returned under whose governorship? Zerubbabel. Who was the priest, the high priest? Jeshua, right, or Joshua, but Jeshua mentioned in the first part of Ezra. And so there was that first return under Zerubbabel, and then there was another return under Ezra that's mentioned in the book of Ezra, the latter part of the book. And then the third return is what we've been studying in Nehemiah. The time when he returns is about 440 what BC? About 444 BC, best we can tell, maybe 445. I see David and Patty here with us. This is so wonderful. Good to see you, my friend. Glad you're well enough to be back with us. Yes, both of you. It's just a pleasure. I'm glad you made it through. Thankful. So we've got the time about 445 to 444 BC when Nehemiah returns, and he stays for about 12 years, to about from 444 to about 432, and then he goes to where? Back to Babylon, possibly Shushan or Susa, but he's there, likely Babylon, and then he comes back, and when he comes back, according to chapter 13, what does he find? Backsliding, all kinds of terrible problems. And so what we find then, if we just pick up in chapter 13, let's see what's our problem here. Maybe let's do this here. Yeah, okay. So 1 through 7, the reconstruction or the rebuilding of the wall or walls. 8 through 13, we have the restoration of the people. And so we've gone over that. And then the foreigners have been expelled in 1 through 3. The law has been read. And no Moabite or Ammonite should have any what? Exactly. And who in particular, in verses 4 through 9, had residence in the temple itself? Tobiah. And so as a result of that, he is expelled and driven out, and we had our article that we gave out about all of that Sunday. Then the support for the Levites is renewed, the tithe, and then the tithe of the tithe given to the priest, and then the Sabbath law prohibitions were enforced. And Brother Richard, you said verse 21, is that exactly where we stopped? All right, let's look at Nehemiah 13. Really, in the 15th verse, we have the beginning of this situation where Nehemiah sees that they're bringing in sheaves. They're doing all kinds of commerce on the Sabbath day. Men of Tyre, verse 16, are there and bringing in their commercial wares. So in 17 and 18, he argues, he reprimands them, contends with them that they are profaning the Sabbath day. And then he enforces it in 19 through 22 by doing what? He shuts the gates, exactly, and he has people standing there not allowing anyone to come in. Picking up in verse 20, so the merchants and sellers of all kinds of wares lodged without Jerusalem once or twice. Then I testified against them and said unto them, why lodge ye about the wall? If you do so again, I will lay hands on you. From that time forth came they no more on the Sabbath. And I commanded the Levites that they should purify themselves and that they should come and keep the gates to sanctify the Sabbath day. That is, keep it holy, as commanded in the Ten Commandments. Remember unto me, O my God, this also, and spare me according to the greatness of thy loving kindness. I went through, and I may have mentioned this Sunday morning, but I counted 9 specific prayers of Nehemiah that run through the book, some long, some short, but 9. I was telling somebody Monday, I had thought about even preaching on that Sunday night, studying last week about all this, and I decided against it. I still may come back to that, because the prayers of Nehemiah are helpful in our thinking about, well, what's he praying about? What is he acknowledging about the character of God, about himself, about his needs? And it just makes, I think, a wonderful, wonderful lesson to look at that. Okay, so he enforces this in these passages. Any comment or question before we go on? Anyone? All right. Then let's move on. In verses 23 through 29, what we have mentioned first of all is the fact that these Ashdodites, Ammonites, and Moabites had intermixed or intermingled in their marriages with the Israelites, and as a result of that, their children were unable to do what? Speak the language, to know the will of God and the words of God. And we've tried to emphasize this on several different occasions, that the Word of God is given in precise words that God chose. And those words express the ideas God wants for us to know. And it's possible for people to take the words of God and put different meanings. For instance, the elders of churches of Christ. Elders are older men. They're the same as presbyters or shepherds. Well, here you have the Mormon church. Elders are what in the Mormon church? They're youngsters. They're 18, 19, 20. So they've used the Bible term, but have misapplied the Bible term. And so then you have churches that make different offices that are not mentioned. There's no word in the Scripture for the various offices. We've been studying that with some of the young people on Monday nights. And to make a presiding elder over a group of elders. And then that elder becomes a bishop. Well, that's a Bible term, but it's a misapplication of the place. It's another position that the Lord did not intend. And so I say that as just a matter of an example that we need to use Bible phrases, Bible words as much as we possibly can to describe Bible ideas. And that they didn't do that. Now, what was the reasoning behind it for them? Why had they gotten to that point?
People that intermarry, they were speaking a language of the other people as much as it was the Jewish language, Hebrew language, so they forgot
Yes.
the meaning of the word. Kids grew up
Not knowing. That's exactly right. Why don't you read the paragraph, Brother Farron, if you would, 23 through 27, please. 23 through 27. I know I have through 29, but 28 and 29 actually give a prime example of that being done even with the high priest. 23 through 27, please.
In those days, I also saw Jews who married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab, and half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod and could not speak the language of Judah, and spoke according to the language of one of the other people. So I contended with them and cursed them, struck some of them, and pulled out their hair and made them swear by God, saying, "You shall not give your daughters as wives to their sons, nor take their daughters for your sons or yourselves. Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin by these things? Yet among many nations there was no king like him, who was beloved of his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, pagan women cursed him even with him. Should we then hear of your doing all this great evil, transgression against our God, by marrying pagan women?"
Okay, so had they covenanted earlier not to do this very thing? They had. And so they've relented on their word, gone back. And so anyway, Ashdod was a city where? In Philistia, yeah. It was one of the Philistine major cities, one of the major 5. And then, of course, Ammon and Moab all developed from Lot's incestuous relation with his daughters. And they were pagans. We've studied through, the earlier history of the Bible. about Molech and some of those gods that were common among Moab and Ammon. And they were just sheer pagans. And so what we have here in verse 23 again, the Jews married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab, and their children spoke half in the speech of Ashdod and could not speak in the Jews' language, but according to the language of each people. Had a lesson on that several months ago, on the language of Ashdod, and kind of what we were talking about a moment ago, how words mean things. And Paul said in 2 Timothy 1:13 to hold fast the pattern of sound words, that we are to try in the best of our ability to use Bible language to describe Bible things. During the time back in the 1800s when brethren were trying to restore in this country, kind of restore New Testament Christianity, they would say, let's call Bible things by Bible names and do Bible things in Bible ways. And that's a very good, I hate to use the word motto, or it's not a creed or a motto, but it's Bible. And we see the problem that developed even here in Nehemiah. What did Nehemiah do when all that happened and he saw it in verse 25? Yeah, smote certain of them, plucked off their, and made them swear that you were doing wrong. Here, of course, it's a physical nation. It's a physical people, materialistic people. And so he could do all those kinds of things. Who does he use as a prime example of someone who was carried away by his wives? 26. Solomon, yeah. And we studied about that sometime back. 1 Kings 11 gives us that. It's interesting, in the American Standard, about halfway through verse 26, he was beloved of his God. He was beloved. Do your translations say that? He was beloved. There was another name for Solomon, Jedediah. You remember that? And Jedediah means beloved of God. And it's almost like he's saying, I want to emphasize, this man loved God and God loved him. That's kind of the idea of beloved. Dearly beloved, you've heard that. But it's like we recognize true love on your part. There's a mutual love, beloved. And so he was loved by God. He loved God. And yet with all of that, he still did what? He still sinned. And he allowed those, the women that he made with foreign women, people who were not Jews, to cause him to sin. All right. Verse 27, shall we then hearken unto you to do all this great evil, to trespass against our God in marrying foreign women? All right. Well, now, in 28 and 29, I don't have this subdivided up here, but it's a part, it's almost like another illustration to show how family connections, marriages with pagan women, have led people into sin. And Sister Sandra, if you would read that for us, 28 and 9.
Was son-in-law to Sanballat, a Horonite. Therefore I chased him from me. Remember them, O my God, because they have defiled the priesthood and the covenant with the priesthood and of the Levites.
Okay, so one of the sons of Joiada, the son of Eliashib, the high priest, was son-in-law to Sanballat. Okay, so that would mean a grandson to Eliashib had married the daughter of Sanballat. A grandson of the high priest, Eliashib, marries the daughter of one of the arch enemies of Israel. One of that mocked and ridiculed God's people back in chapter 4. And they're married like that didn't mean anything. Their attitude toward God and the religion of the Jews, the true religion here, that meant nothing, that they hated us, that they're mocking what we believe, ridiculing. And there's a powerful lesson, guys. I know people can be taught. My dad was one. My mother influenced my dad when he wasn't a Christian to come to services, and he was taught and obeyed. But oftentimes, when a person marries someone and their attitude is just so belligerent toward the truth, the gospel, the church, God's people, and then you marry, and then you're, you're with them. And then if they don't change, and then children are born, and the children are listening to that ridicule, and all of that, it makes it extremely hard for a person to continue to do right. And that was one of the points we made in our little article that we wrote the other day on some of the lessons that our marriages are the closest physical relations we have. And when they are among people who do not care for God and they ridicule, then we're in deep water. We're in big trouble. And so we got to be careful about that. Comment, question, anybody? Yes, sir.
Sanballat and Tobiah, the two people that were, one married his grandson?
Yeah, grandson married the daughter of Sanballat, yeah.
And Tobiah was in the temple.
Yes.
Those two guys conspired to try to kill
Nehemiah.
Nehemiah earlier.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and they brought him right back in.
As if everything's A-okay.
But
Yeah.
Nehemiah didn't seem to mind putting hands on people when he needed to.
That's right. He didn't.
I mean, he threw Tobiah out, threw his stuff out. And then
Yes.
he struck some of them,
Pull
pulled their hair.
their hair? Yeah. He meant business. I'm reminded of in the New Testament, who did that in the temple? Jesus Christ did. He turned the tables over of the money changers, you remember? Likely they were extorting from the people when they came in from various places and had different currency, and they had to trade in order to perhaps buy a sheep or buy a bull or whatever. And so they were extorting. And so and the tables were located in the wrong place. They were in the temple precinct where people would be going through the courtyard, and that wasn't right. And so Jesus turned over and drove them out with a whip and said, "My Father's house shall not be a what? A den of thieves. You made my Father's house the place of prayer, a den of thieves." And so he ran them out for that, and we see that with Nehemiah. Yeah.
What I think about that, though, those guys that were outside the gate, camping outside the gate, he said, if you do it again, I'll put hands on you.
Yeah, arrest you.
Well, he said, you put hands on someone.
Yeah.
They thought, well,
He means business, yeah. Arrest them in some way. Good point. Well, let's finish up. In the last little bit here, well, I've got a note. On verse 24, the children spoke a jargon, half Ashdodite and half Aramaic from Rawlinson in Pulpit Commentary. The mixed marriages corrupted the second generation as well as the first. Confusion in language signaled erosion of Israelite identity, a compromise which would undo centuries of work. And then in 26 and 7, which we read about Solomon, Solomon is an illustration of, it was not because Solomon didn't know better, and it was not because he wasn't wise enough to see the distinctions. He was wise, he was beloved of God, and he loved God, and yet he sinned. He sinned in all that. The powerful lesson in all this is, take heed, he that thinks he stands, what? Take heed lest he fall. That any of us can be led away if we're not careful. Let's finish up here. Kirsten, if you would, 30 and 31, please.
Thus I cleansed them from everything foreign, and I established the duties of the priests and Levites, each in his work, and I provided for the wood offering at appointed times and for the first fruits. Remember me, O my God, for the good.
Okay, thanks, Kirsten. It's a summary, isn't it? I cleansed them. Okay, so here are people who've been married to these foreign wives. I cleansed them from that, appointed charges for priests and Levites. In other words, I reorganized, made sure everything was to the provisions for the Levites were to be taken care of as they should. And then, the wood offering is mentioned back. You remember that? The wood offering, wood had to be used for what? Sacrifice. There was burning to be done all the time. Well, where'd that wood come from? Somebody has to bring it in. And like the old phrase, what's everybody's business is nobody's business. Well, he'll get it. I've read an article years ago about anybody, everybody, nobody. You remember that, Brother Gene? What's that? Somebody, yeah. Somebody could do the work of the church, and anybody thought nobody thought anybody could do it. It was almost like who's on first, you know, and it's a great article, but that's the idea. So he made sure that the wood was taken care of, and then it ends as it begins. The book ends as it begins in chapter 1 with a what? With a prayer. Yeah. For the wood offering it, he says, remember me, O God, for good. That is, I'm trying to do your will. Please remember me. Be merciful to me for what I've tried to do. Is that a bad prayer? Obviously not. And I think that we can adapt that to us. You know, when we're trying our best and we know this is the Lord's will, please, Father, remember what we're doing now. And you look like you wanted to say something. Okay, all right. So 13, the final chapter, has a number of these reforms. Major divisions, 1 through 7, the rebuilding of the walls. 8 through 13, rebuilding of the people, restoration of the people, reformation of the people. The reading of the law in 8, the confession of sin in 9 with a lengthy prayer, the covenant rededicated in 10, and then in 11 and part of 12 we have the genealogies that go back and show all these people who've dedicated themselves. And then we have in the end of 12 the dedication of the walls, and then 13 these reforms. All right, I ask you to take chapter by chapter and give me an idea about each one. Let me read this with you. If you would look up real quickly to this. The summary of Nehemiah's reforms. I found a couple of quotes I thought were good. For these reforms, Nehemiah prayed that God might remember him for good, and the inclusion of his memoirs or his history in the sacred canon, that is the whole book, was one way heaven answered this concluding prayer. The final chapter of Nehemiah underscores the impression already created by the earlier chapters about who he was. He's fervent in zeal. He possessed holy boldness, which made him brutally blunt with both friend and foe. Nehemiah was a masterful organizer and motivator, a man of action, and even more important, a man of the scriptures and a man of prayer. A man who approaches God on his knees will stand tall in any generation. I thought that was extremely well stated by James Smith. Okay, so here are the quick facts, who he was. Remember Ezra, responsible for encouraging the building of the temple. Nehemiah, the walls. Okay. All right, here we go. Let's go back. Yes, sir.
One quick question. There couldn't have been as little as 2 years that Nehemiah was gone.
Yeah.
Returned to the presence of Artaxerxes and then came back.
Yeah.
It seems they were on a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Somehow they
A quick fall.
quickly. It seemed like,
Yes.
at the end of chapter 10, you're reading about the celebration.
Yeah.
And all the people exalting and
Singing and
made their contract at the end of
Yeah.
chapter 10, and then you name a few names.
and then it reminded me of Galatians 1. I marvel you are so soon removing from him that called you. But these people had the advantage of all the years. And okay, good point. We need to come back to that real quickly. Gene mentioned about the time. Remember, he comes in the 20th year of Artaxerxes, which is about 444. Some say 445. 464 is usually considered when he began his reign. So 20th year. And then we go down to the 12th year. He'd been there 12 years, or the 32nd year is mentioned. So that puts him down to 432. And then in 13:6, which is where we were, he goes to Babylon. And as Brother Gene mentioned, if it's a year or two, give it 3 even. He comes back, and it's perhaps 429, 430. And some believe he may have remained governor until Artaxerxes died in 424, which would have put the covering of the book about 20 years. But Brother Gene is exactly right. I mean, there is just a commitment and then a falling away very, very quickly. Very reminiscent. Anybody else on any of this? Sandra, you look like you're about to say something. Okay, well, we don't have much time, but let's do what we had talked about. You know the chapters. So chapter 1, we have basically he finds out about how bad things are, and then we have a prayer. David, so glad to see you, my friend. What do you have for chapter 1? Okay, he hears prayers. Anybody else want to add to that? Richard, what do you have? Yes. Okay. I put something, I'm going to give you mine. About what are we grieved the most? He is evident in Nehemiah, the first chapter there in, if I can find it quickly, it's the right column. In verse 4, that he sat, and when he heard everything, he sat down, wept, he mourned, he fasted, and he prayed. And then the prayer is revealed there. What are we upset about the most? This really moved him, and it moved him to do something, and God used him and instructed him, of course, but he had the motive himself to do all this. All right, good. Chapter 2, anybody? Kirsten, what do you have for 2? Good. A Godward attitude is constant prayer. Patty, you have something on 2?
It was about the same thing, that he, through prayer, he asked the king, he asked God through prayer, and then he asked the king to go help execute the plan.
Okay, good. Anybody else? Brother Gene? Exactly. He went to work as soon as he got permission. Brother Farron? He saw a need, and he... I used to hear somebody kind of jokingly say, I seen my duty and I done it. Well, that's basically what he saw the need. Well, let's get this job done. And he did that. Anybody else?
Can't underestimate the good of one man that can be done.
Exactly. Don't underestimate the good one person can do. I put same things Kirsten had, basically, pray without ceasing. When Artaxerxes says, what's wrong with you, Nehemiah? Why are you looking? And so the first thing he does is, I prayed to Jehovah. So evidently, as we mentioned way back, those arrow prayers, and then he investigated the problems for himself. You remember, he went out and he just told very few people, and he went out. And I think that's, don't take things just on face value, especially if there's a problem in the church. Try to do your own investigation about something if it's necessary, and don't just listen to one person. See what happens. All right, chapter 3. What do you have on that? Anybody? Okay. Chapter 3 deals with the beginning of the rebuilding of the gates and the wall. And you mentioned enthusiasm. Anybody else? Sister Eleanor? Working together. Yes, they were all organized, weren't they? Sister Billy? Okay. Unity. Yeah, that's good. Anybody else?
If somebody couldn't, somebody else stood up to help them.
Yes.
When they got to where some of them couldn't do it.
Good. All right. Mine was, there's always work to do. Encourage others to work. That's kind of what you were saying, Patty. There's always work. And I think, sometimes we can help other people who might be down on themselves, or they think that they're really not any use in the kingdom, and just come and say, hey, I appreciate your presence here. Just being here is an encouragement to everybody. And I know that maybe we can get together and visit with somebody or something along those lines.
It also is the gates, which shows that God's specific. He has a
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right, Sandra. Good point. All right. Chapter 4, 4 through 6, deals with opposition to the work and the external forces, mocking and threatening. What do you have for that, Brother Rich?
Even though there were external enemies, God's plan went forward.
Okay, they went on. Don't let enemies get you down, right? Angela, we left you out. What do you have for that? Okay, Eleanor?
They weren't discouraged when people made fun of them and tried to keep them from doing what they were supposed to do.
Yes, exactly. Anybody else?
There's always been opposition to God's word.
Yes, always. In fact, bitterness and hatred to the point that what happened to the first two sons? First two sons in the Bible. You know who they were? Cain and Abel. What happened? One of them killed the other because, his works were righteous and his brother's wicked, 1 John says. Randy, you have something you want to offer on that? Okay. All right. I put enemies of truth and righteousness mock. They will belittle us. Paul said in 2 Timothy 3, yea, all that would live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer what? Persecution. It's a given. All right, chapter 5. Who has something you want to, the internal strife, the problems with finances and so on. Who wants to give us something?
Even in the short-term project, there's going to be some internal difficulties.
Yeah, short-term projects have internal strife. I'm going to go ahead and, some of the brethren there were divisive, and let's never be divisive. Now, we want to stick for the truth, and that's not peace at any price, but Paul talks about in Ephesians 4 to keep the unity of the Spirit's unity in the bond of peace, and exemplify humility and foster unity. Who led the way in that? Nehemiah, great Patty, and what did he do? Instead of doing what he had the right to do, which was take what? Basically take a salary. He refused that. He was having help, of course, from Artaxerxes, but he led in this. Let's go the extra mile in all this. All right, then diversionary tactics. Sanballat, Tobiah say, why don't you come on down to the plain of Ono and let's talk about this. Let's have a unity meeting. What do you have for that, guys? Anybody? David, what do you have for that? Anybody? For Aaron? What's that, Richard? The perseverance of Nehemiah. I put, you can't always help what some say about you. They did that about Nehemiah, but yet don't give up, never give up on the Lord. Sometimes did people criticize the Lord for things he wasn't guilty of? Certainly. In Matthew 11, they criticized both John and Jesus. They said, John has Jesus is a friend of publicans and sinners, and John has a demon. Well, he was a friend in a sense to publicans and sinners, but not in the way that they were trying to make it out. Yes, ma'am.
Would it be a stretch to say that Nehemiah recognized a lie because what they were saying was not true?
That's right. Yes, I think so.
They would recognize that and know that they were making that up, what they were saying.
Yes, they were. And they had,
It's important sometimes because if you can recognize something that's not being true, it doesn't keep you from the jaw attack.
yes, I think that's right. Lee and I have known some people, and we heard something about, and we knew those people well. And we said, I know that is not true. That is not true. They wrote an open letter, kind of publicized, trying to put additional pressure. And Nehemiah knew that. But I think that's helpful. We can't always help what some people say about us. We just got to live in such a way that thinking people who know us what? They know it's not true.
Seems like evil always tries to overshadow good.
Yes, that's right, David. It always attempts. And sometimes it may even look like it's victorious in this life, but it won't be in the life to come. Don't give up. Never give up on the Lord. All right. The appointment of good men over Jerusalem and the census in chapter 7. Some of this, we got to stop here a second. Appreciate the good and faithful men and women who have sacrificed for the cause of Christ. Here, there's a listing of these people who, had come over and given up things. And in chapter 8, real quickly, one idea in chapter 8. What is it? What's that? Read the book. Read the book, yes. Respect for the reading of God's law. Public confession of sin, chapter 9. What do you have for that? What's that?
Jesus' the longest reported prayer.
Yes.
Never be afraid to confess you done something wrong and ask for
Exactly. That's a great lesson. I mentioned because it seems to be a common denominator. True confession of sin is helped when we think of God's greatness and His holiness and His power. All those ideas are through the prayer. And then my own littleness, my own sins, and my weakness in comparison to God. I think that helps me.
There's one thing to confess your sin, there's another one to change it.
That's right. People can acknowledge it and just don't change anything. And they don't do what when they do that? They confess it, but they don't repent of it. That's right. All right, they renew their covenant. Anybody on that? All right, I'll tell you what I put. They recognize areas of one's weakness, and that's what they did. They said, okay, these are 3 or 4 areas where we have really let God down, and they commit to change. Now, how long they did that is another thing. 11 through 13, people bound by these vows. And 11 really through half of 12 is the genealogy of the residents, and then the dedication of the walls at the end of 12. And I put all that together for my what I was going to bring to you. And I just ask a question, what legacy or what kind of an example am I leaving behind for others? If I died tonight, what would somebody say? Well, Owens, he, wasn't always as bad as he sometimes was. Or so what are we leaving behind for people? Like Dorcas left her what? Yes, or left the things that she had made for the others. And the last one, the 13th chapter, I had several things. The Reformation, never think we can't fall. Elisha did. Don't let evil or weak family influences be our standard. Always consider our contribution. The Levites, you remember, were shortchanged. Lord's Day activities should reflect the spirit of the day. What had they begun to do on the Sabbath? Just sell everything. They weren't concerned about the thinking about God. And then one cannot be too careful about who he or she marries. Because the marriages of the foreign people led to their inability to speak how? In the right language, yeah, and to actually articulate the ways of God. Oh, what's that, Brother Farron? That's right. They lost their identity. Anybody else? Okay, well, Lord willing, we will get into Malachi on the Lord's Day. And it's a short prophet. And then we'll be through with the Old Testament. Can you believe it?